Hey everybody. I'm sitting here desperately looking at my audio feed. Yes, it's actually picking me up. Hi, welcome to Goat's Eye View, where Helpful Goat Gaming talks about games and life and how to do both of those things hopefully a little bit better. My name is Galway. I am one of the founders of Helpful Goat Gaming, a small independent game design and game content creation community. And with the nights getting a little bit longer, with the air getting, hopefully where you are, a little bit cooler, it's been pretty warm here most of the time. So we are turning to scary stories in RPGs. So we're sort of doing this as part of our month of October, where we're doing a bunch of one-shots and sort of one-off adventures from various DMs. And as part of that, we're going to talk about being scary but not scarring. And so talking about player agency, player safety, but also how to just tell a good scary story with a tabletop RPG. If you are interested in checking out more of this, there's a playlist over at YouTube. You can just look for us there, Helpful Goat Gaming. We stream on Twitch, twitch.tv/helpfulgoat. And we stream basically every week multiple times. Tomorrow we have the finale of the first arc of Spire, which involves, hopefully I'm successfully pointing out on the screen. The group's made some decisions. Now they have some consequences. No consequences?
Oh,
yeah, I'm sure Lisa's just going to let you have no consequences.
Everything was fine.
On Friday, you'll see me and, again, Rachel, who will guest starting as Clem on our long-running, long-form campaign, level 1 to level 20, Goats and Dragons, The Fates of Rin. And so that should be a lot of fun. But tonight, we are here to talk about scary stories in tabletop RPGs and how to do that really effectively and really safely. I am being joined tonight by a number of wonderful guests who I will introduce. First and foremost, and I've already pointed at her twice, the first time Rachel appeared on this program, she taught you how to play Dungeons & Dragons with your children. Now she's going to help teach you how to play Dungeons & Dragons with your children and scare the hell out of them. This is her progression. First play with children, then make the hobby scary. I'm also joined, and you'll also be DMing the 28th?
Cirque du So Scary.
28th, is that?
Yeah,
yes,
28th. I'm DMing Cirque du So Scary with Chris.
Cirque du So Scary, which Chris will be appearing in. That's a D&D one-shot for the scary season. We're also joined by Heather, who you may be familiar with as Ressa in Tyr, who will be DMing next week on the 21st, a game of Grant Howitt's Wake, which we're really looking forward to. Also joined by Chris, a longtime player, traveler of Tyr. First appearance as Crotch the Sticky. I haven't mentioned it in a while. I get a pass. It's like once a month.
Yes.
And also a horror aficionado and horror writer. One of your stories has appeared on the No Sleep podcast, I believe, Picture Perfect. Yes. So you're going to be lending us some perspective as someone who just really enjoys the craft of building a scary story. And we're also very, very excited to be joined by a friend of Helpful Goat, Adam's very good friend, Tyler, roommate currently, and also the editor of his book, The Last Thing I Will Ever Write, Part 1, which is excellent. You should pick it up if you haven't. You've been auto-modded. You already got auto-modded, Rachel. I can't even get through intros without you getting auto-modded. If we ever... So... To introduce Tyler, who has not yet appeared with us, if ever we get brigaded by trolls, Rachel's going to be the cause of a lot of pain. Okay. Our auto-modding has had to make some exceptions for her. Thank you so much for joining us. You had just recently, Adam had been telling me about it, and I was like, I kind of want to do a show about something very similar. Have you been talking about?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be on the Ghoul on Ghoul podcast. It's a Pittsburgh podcast. Sex positive horror spooky story podcast with my friends Amanda and Sarah. They had me on to talk about horror RPGs as an indie game designer, and also to talk about romance and intimacy RPGs. And that led to a conversation about the importance of consent, the importance of communication in all kinds of role-playing games. And also just how a lot of the kind of informed consent conversations that folks should be having around things like sex, things like tabletop role-playing games are a lot of the same conversations that people are having, hopefully, in regards to the pandemic right now, as far as being upfront about comfort levels, about contact tracing, things like that. And also just like people's, horror threshold for how much doom scrolling they want to do during any given day or conversation.
Awesome, yeah. So thank you so much, everybody, for appearing. And so I think we're going to have some really interesting conversations, get to go over a lot of stuff, both about how to build effective spooky stories and then also how to build them really safely. It's because, like I went for wordplay in the title, but, the point of this is to be eerie, bone-chilling, leave everyone sort of on the edge of their seat or really, really nervous. It's not to traumatize them. That's never our goal. We have a lot of conversations. We have a lot of really good conversations around this. So I expect more on those topics to be coming up. You, Tyler, I believe you wanted to drop a link to your itch. If you send that over to me, I will drop it into the chat.
Yeah. I'll stick that in the Goat's Eye view. But more than anything, I'm here to talk with y'all about these games and about safe practices.
Yeah.
More than plug my own work. But it's just simply Tyler-Crumrine, CRUMRINE.itch.io. And you can find some of the micro stuff I've worked on there. But mostly I don't write a lot of horror RPGs. I've edited on a couple. I've played on a good number. But I'll mostly just be recommending other people's work today, including some really cool safety mechanics that people have come up with.
Yeah, one of the questions that we kind of had bouncing around in our Discord, by the way, as a reminder to anyone listening, if you use !Discord command in Twitch, you can get a link to join our Discord where we talk about these kinds of things a lot. For any of you all, what's your favorite kind of horror to GM or play in for tabletop role-playing games? And what I mean by that, and maybe I'll just answer this one first, is that I lean very much towards psychological horror, not so much monster-focused, not so much the sort of eerie, creepy feel, but a lot of that. I believe the comparison that Adam made repeatedly in the two-shot I did last year was this is like playing a tabletop RPG version of House of Leaves. So very much that's where sort of my comfort and my personal preference falls. What about everybody else?
A perennial favorite of mine is Dread by Epadiah Ravencall. If you're not familiar with Dread, it is a game that recreates Final Girl type horror stories, or in general, just like a horror story where members of a party are picked off one by one by some kind of monster or pursuing force. And the really interesting thing that the game does is that instead of dice, it uses a Jenga tower. And anytime a player character on their turn makes a decision, they pull a block out of the tower. And so when the tower falls on someone's turn, that character dies and the tower is reset and the plot continues. Someone can also make a choice during their turn to knock over the tower, to sacrifice their character, reset the tower, and basically reset the danger clock of the pursuers. And so it's a really deceptively simple system that can be used to play a lot of different games. Whether it is like Slasher in the Woods, you could just as easily use those mechanics for, Alien type game where the alien is in the space station. But the thing that I really love about Dread is I think what it does better than some other horror RPG systems is the medium really is the message. You feel the tension of the story as you feel the tension of the Jenga tower becoming more precarious. And I think it's really interesting to try and find those games where it doesn't just fall on the GM to create the horror of the moment, where there is also things about the mechanics of the game itself that kind of mirror the experience you're hoping the players are going to have.
There's actually, not that this has anything to do with horror, but sorry. I've played another type of RPG game that also uses Jenga as well with Elise, actually, where we played but it was a romance one. So I mean,
Was it Starcrossed?
yes. And I will
Starcrossed,
say
yeah.
that it was terrifying because like I was role playing being in love with Elise as we were playing through this thing, and that's like not a thing I usually do. So like that was it was a really cool system just to play with that kind of like it actually brings in real tension in a way that like roles are intense, sure, but like having the precariousness of it actually be there is a really cool addition. So
Yeah, Alex Roberts started Starcross as a hack of Dread.
okay.
And then over the course of the design, playtesting, it became kind of a Ship of Theseus type thing where enough pieces were slowly switched out that it kind of became its own game.
Gotcha.
But it is true. Like she looked at Dread and was like, well, how can I take the tension of these horror scenarios and instead apply that same tension to a forbidden love scenario?
But I will say too that also like involved um talking about consent and comfort and things too, because I also think that like Elise is way more comfortable with those things than I am when it comes to like role playing out those kinds of things as like and um it was a nice way like before playing even just to discuss like, okay, these are the things that could happen in this game. These are like I'm comfortable with it going this far, but I'm not comfortable with, saying or doing these things. And I think that absolutely just pertains to horror as well.
Yeah.
Heather, Chris.
Any other favorite games folks like to run or play?
I actually don't have a lot of experience with RPG horror. I am DMing Curse of Strahd right now, and I'm having tons of fun finding the line between spooking the players and keeping them from being too, I don't want to say too scared, but because that's not true. It's not horror in the sense that like we're talking about here.
Well,
but
I think that is an important question to ask your players. So when you pitch a horror game to your players, or like it's important to also have those conversations like what does a successful horror game or what does a fun horror game look like for your players? Because for some people, when they say they want to play a horror RPG, they still want to like do the thing where they win at the end. Like their idea of a horror campaign is making it through the slasher flick and, being the survivors on the other end of the lake. There's some people though, like that are looking for more of like a scary story around the campfire type experience where maybe it ends on a dour note or it ends without any kind of satisfying conclusion. And there are tons of different games that scratch those different itches. It's just a matter of knowing what your players want so that you can either kind of pick the game that, like Dread, best serves that purpose, or, being a creative enough GM or homebrew designer to kind of craft a Strahd experience into something that's like, all right, these are the bullet points that I want to hit, but this hits the sweet spot of what my players are looking for.
Right. And for me, I like the psychological horror. I like suspense and drama and being really scared. Less, and like if I'm watching a movie, less blood and guts, less gore, more suspense. And so I try to put that into the game, and I find that works pretty well. But
Chris?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
We know you're a huge horror aficionado. So.
Yeah, so I guess I haven't found the right group to actually play a good like tabletop horror game with. One of my really good friends, Brian, I love playing like is it House of Cthulhu? Is this the Call of Cthulhu?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And like, but he's so frustrating because he is not a team player, and so that really he just wants to just do his own thing, which always causes the rest of the party like some strife. And so I try not to play those games because I always end up playing with people like that who, don't get me wrong, I love him dearly, but I want to like win and not everybody gets screwed. But as far as for like single player, like I'm more of a video gamer. So I play like the Evil Within, which just is ridiculously psychological, but is at the same time it's in your face. There's gore, there's monsters, and so I mean, I don't really like splatterpunk, because like I feel like there needs to be a reason for like the blood and the guts and the gore and the ripping and shredding of bodies, which has its place, but that shouldn't be like the main focus of a game. So finding that right perfect way to kind of like weave everything in together, I think is really great storytelling as far as hitting on all the senses of the player.
If I can make a quick recommendation, have you looked into any GM-less horror games where there is no GM, just like everyone is GM, everyone is player?
Mhm.
Because if one of the problems you're encountering is that, you know, the individual player drive to like keep their player character alive or
Right.
to achieve their goals. One way you might be able to head that off is by playing games where the GM role is shared between all the players, or a rotating GM role, where it is kind of more of a collaborative, almost exquisite corpse around a campfire, than necessarily something where someone even has like the verbs to kind of steamroll the story. Specifically, a game that I worked on with World Champ Game Co. and Exalted Funeral is called Cobwebs, and it recreates horror podcasts, where what it does is it asks you to like record an audio log at the start of the game, and you're chasing down a conspiracy. And as you get closer to the conspiracy, more like things start happen, people start to disappear, metaphors start showing up. But each turn, the role of the GM, the role of the hero, and the role of basically the person who describes the stage directions switches between players. And it can do a lot to help democratize those stories if you find that someone is maybe taking the lead in a way that is like, especially in terms of horror, like detracting from kind of the creepiness of it all.
Yeah, I was gonna say, 'cause a lot of those ones that are more diffuse like that help a lot if you have, and especially because it's one of the nice things that I would say that when I've seen them, played them, run them, they help through the act of just playing the game get to that consensus of what are we trying to accomplish as a party, because it pulls you out a little bit of just this is my precious character that I will get through.
Yeah. And that is part of that conversation too. It's like, what does a good game look like to your players? You know, if your players are here to like smash stuff, then, you know, give them an avenue to do that. If they're there to like, you know, like recreate Goosebumps, then, you know, maybe take that agency away and let them feel helpless.
What did you start to say, Rachel?
Oh, I was just gonna also share my favorite kinds of horror, so I didn't want to interrupt, because if you were still talking about the same thing, then I didn't want to do that. But I find that I personally really like the kind that involve, like for me playing, I like the kind that involves slowly breaking down over time. You know, like I like the kind that just involves, you know, like your character devolving kind of into more and more scatterbrained freak out, this kind of a thing. I like the idea that as it
Going
goes,
mad.
as it goes further on, you're like not doing as good of a job because these things have been happening, right? So I really enjoy those kinds of things. And like being given the opportunity to do those kinds of things. And um, a lot of it has to do with, like you said, other players too, and how they interact well with it. Because like if that's a choice I make for my character, but nobody else wants to go along with that, then I just kind of seem like an asshole. So again, communication is key. So
I say we do preach the doctrine of session zero. It's very, very important to get
There's a
people
very
to...
cool game called Quietus by Ollie Jeffrey. He pitches it as a game of melancholy horror. So very much kind of like the art house horror films type stuff. And one of the very cool mechanics that he's included in that game is that in order to improve your die rolls, I think there's a similar concept in some Cthulhu games. You take on stress.
Mm-hmm.
But when you take on stress, you also narrate like a flashback from your character's past as to why this is a situation that would be stressful for you. And so kind of over the course of play, you know, as your character is kind of like regressing into past horrors, like as a table, you are finding out what those past horrors are together. I was playing a game where like I opened a fridge to like take out a PBR and a ghost made all of them explode and stuff around me. And in part of like taking stress in that situation, we wound up like narrating like a quiet moment with my character's brother on like a porch that turned into a conflict over like, you know, who forgot to buy more beer. So yeah, there's like, there are so many different kinds of horror games out there. I am one of those people that like, I did not watch scary movies for years because I was just too much of a baby. And it kind of took friends lovingly walking me through like, hey, there's a difference between Saw and The Shining to actually realize like, what is the kind of horror that I enjoy.
Sort of going to that, a question from Chris earlier. When you're playing, when you're writing, when you're thinking about a scene, when you're thinking about setting up this game, what elements do you favor? What do you try to build into that scene? And I actually find this one kind of an interesting question, especially for Rachel and Heather, who have a GMing/DMing session coming up in horror. Like, without giving too much away, what have you been trying to build in?
Uncertainty, I think, is a big thing. Players, they're not really sure what's going to happen. They're not really sure even what's real. That's anytime your players, you know, not entirely sure, that breeds fear.
I like that. I think that it's hard to say. So I have a lot of things in my game, and there's not a lot I can say.
Rachel, tell me everything that I'm going to do in your game.
I can't. There's there's a lot I can't say because I have some things planned that are surprises, and so I can't talk a lot about a lot of the structures and stuff. But I also, I mean, most of you know me fairly well. I'm generally like, I'm like fun and funny and like this or that. So like it's also going to involve a lot of that because that's just how I am. So it's not going to be like super serious scary because I don't know how to exist like that. You know, like that's just like I enjoy that. It's just not how I am, you know. So like it will definitely, I think mine will have, you know, spooky elements, and I have like surprises and things within it to be the scary part, but there's also going to be like fun stuff too, because that's just how I am, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think that Heather got it right in that like it is just like a lot of like on your toes, you know, you don't necessarily know what's coming from one thing to the next, you know.
Right. And I'm not thinking that, okay, mine has to be all serious and it's just going to be spooky, scary. You know, I'm very willing to roll with the players, and there can certainly be, you know, fun and laughs along the way. But while you're, you know, you could still be laughing about, oh my God, I'm going to die. So,
Oh yeah, for sure. I just am like, I think that everybody has their different strengths in how they are, and my kind of default way of being is just kind of being a not serious jackass. So that's also what my games are like when I play in them and when I run them.
I
So
liked the eager pause of, what are you going to finish with? I need. How are you going to end this sentence, Rachel?
could be anything.
Oh.
That's
Yeah, so-
I'm always keeping you on your toes in that way. It's scary in the sense of, should this be censored? Is Rachel going to say something inappropriate? I'm
Yes.
scared.
Most definitely.
We have consensus on this one, Rachel. That's not really uncertainty. What
Fair,
exactly
fair.
will it be? You've
Yes.
proven the auto mod has worked for months and still keeps working.
It's true. It loves me. But I think that my favorite aspect of like horror movies and things is when things are, totally different than what they seem, right? Like we just watched Cabin in the Woods, and I love that movie for like
Mhm.
the huge surprise kind of, crazy thing that it has. And like those things are some of the most fun things, I think. But also really hard to pull off, but I really enjoy that, like, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, along those same lines, I think that, a lot of what I like to include and what I find effective in games is frustrated expectations. Like kind of knowing what are the tropes that exist in the genre, what kind of things your players might be expecting from the game, from the story, and rolling with it when it's satisfying, but also knowing how like you can lead them down a very specific path by playing into something and then turning at the last minute.
Chris, how about you?
What was the question again?
What when you it's your question.
I know.
When you're building sort of a scary scene,
Oh, yeah.
most important element, and also just sort of what's your own personal favorite?
For me, I think the most important element kind of is, I guess, well, it really also depends on the scene too, as far as like what's important in that. But I think my favorite element is taking something that's not like in any other aspect of that person's life terrifying, and then doing that thing that makes it terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just completely uproot them from their sense of stability, and then this happens, and now that thing that was stable is no longer, and they have to figure out how to effectively deal with this now new part of their life that is causing the issue, the climax, or however it falls in your story. But just completely screwing with them, I guess. To be fair.
And it sounds like, so basically, Sam in chat was asking, can you give an example of that? It sounds like you're very focused on sort of taking something that is mundane, or not even safe, but just this is not a place of tension, horror, etc. And now it is.
And I mean, it could be, and just pretty much anything. Like, you take your, just kind of almost like your everyday life. So I just wrote the story, and I submitted it to see if it'll be in an anthology or not. But in the story, this woman, she catches another kind of creepy woman out of the corner of her eye, but she did it while she was grocery shopping. And it's just like, it's the middle of the day, it's it should be normal, this is one thing. But then as the days go by, she keeps kind of seeing this person. And so it went from her normal I'm out grocery shopping and getting what I need, and oh, I just happen to pass by this person because I've passed by hundreds of other people, but just this one person sticks out and keeps reoccurring in her daily life until it keeps building and it keeps building. And so that kind of thing where you just take this should not be a terrifying thing to, oh my God, this terrifying thing is in my face now. So completely messing with my characters.
Yeah, I think that for me, in terms of my own answer to this question, a lot of you sort of touched on elements of this. The piece that I really loved in The Dark Following, the one I mentioned that I did last year, was a lot of series of things that and I think both Heather and Tyler really touched on this, of established a series of expectations of like, oh, okay, I recognize what this horror trope is, or oh, I recognize what this D&D trope is. I recognize how this is supposed to play out, and then complicating that a little bit through. One of my favorite scenes in that was the sort of classic D&D, oh, we've got a hallway, and there's some doors, and it's a locked door, and okay, there's kind of a puzzle, we need to activate it. Oh, the door slammed open. Okay, yeah, okay, we sort of tried to role play the jump scare, but we're in the hallway, and now we move through. And my favorite part of that was sort of feeling the characters be like, okay, we're making progress, and then narrating to them that they are back in the room they were just in, which is physically impossible for the route that they had taken, and seeing the, oh crap, okay, we're going to be in this trope. And then as soon as they go sort of out into the hallway and do the next thing, things all work differently. It's like, no, I'm actually not giving you the just recycling the hallway. It's just this was also in a point in the game where it was stepping up from, we're doing sort of a dungeon crawl D&D adventure, to no, stuff is very, very scary and wrong, and physics are wrong. What the hell is going on? And so that's that kind of uncertainty that I like to breed. I also like getting to play with, and this is a thing that I do in a lot of my campaigns. I don't think actually any of you all have played with me in a campaign where I've done it. I often ask my players to come up with secrets for their character, like a big secret to start with. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm secretly evil, or oh, I killed lots of orphans. But it has to be a thing that the character is actually invested in not letting other people know. And I really enjoyed in that one getting to play with those characters' secrets and tying them into the horror of, at one point they went into a room with discarded files, and they're just like, oh, these are all boring. And they were sort of flipping through them, investigation checks, everyone did well. And then there was a clipping about one of the characters that couldn't possibly have been there. And it was really fun watching that one person go, oh, the impossible space knows about me. So I think that that's a thing that I think is very interesting as an aspect of horror. And it's interesting because, Rachel, you had commented on the getting ground down, that sort of the oppressive nature and the things fall apart model, which I actually included in Dark Following, but is one of the things I think I often try to avoid in scary stories, is too much of the everything is bad and it's all getting worse. I kind of like the you don't know where you are. Almost the way that I would say it is, I try to build that backwards of, you didn't realize how bad it was at the beginning. Okay. Your journey is figuring out how bad it is, and then you can get out of it. But I think that's, yeah, I love that uncertainty. I love getting to create that sense in players of what's going on. And I think playing with that mechanically in tabletop RPGs is actually a really effective way of doing it. And everyone sort of mentioned this in some, when like, it's really hard to do jump scares in tabletop RPGs.
It's also like, you can, like, yes, it is very hard to do a jump scare, around a table, or even harder over like a Discord chat. But you can implement other kind of performance tools as a GM as well. Like, there is, when you described the scenario about like the repeating hallway, one thing that you could do as a GM is just at no point break kayfabe during that. At no point let on to the fact that like you are aware that you are describing the same hallway again and again and again. You know, as long as it doesn't go so far as like you are actively gaslighting your players.
Mm-hmm.
But you can play into like the creepiness of the situation by like not lingering on the fact that like you see the same door again. You can just like each time they get back in the room, be like, all right, you're in a hallway, 3 doors on the right, 1 on the left. And if they ask you like what this is the same hallway, just refuse to acknowledge it.
Yeah, and I actually more or less, that was very similar in I described the room they'd woken up in, and then they went through the hallway and they got back in, and it was very much I literally repeated the descriptive narration of, you walk into a hallway with plush carpet, there is a portrait on the wall with a man and a woman, you know, frowning down on you, there's an elaborate mirror on a wall, and they're just like, Now my favorite, and in exactly that moment where I leaned even harder into that, because I did love doing that, and this is a thing that I mentioned, my crowning achievement was having one of my players play 3 doppelgangers of himself and him not knowing which one was real, because I'm just like, oh, Andy, another player, you wake up in a room, blah, blah, blah. And I had everybody else get off the call, so like they weren't hearing what was going on. I'm like, okay. I'm like, okay, yeah, cool. Other person, could you get off? And he's like, why am I saying? I'm like, Andy's character and this other character, you wake up in a room. Then again, Andy's character, and Andy's sitting there going like, okay, Jesus. I'm like, just, they're all go. I told you what the scene is. You woke up in a room, do what you would do. And then at the end of all of that, and them sitting there basically pointing at each other, because there were then 3 of them, I was like, everybody but Andy, get off. Andy, you wake up in a room alone. It's like, up until that, he goes, I literally did not know which one was, I thought I was one of the 3.
So another quick game recommendation, this reminds me of my friends, Adam Voss, he's also the person behind World Champ Game Co. And Will Jobst, he's made a lot of great games. Black Mass, he co-created A Guide to Casting Phantoms in the Revolution. They made a game together called This Discord Has Ghosts in It. And it's a role-playing game that is purely played over Discord. And basically, you take a Discord template where each of the channels of the Discord is a different room. And players are either investigators or ghosts. Investigators can only talk in the Discord chat. Ghosts can only type. And so, like, as you are going through the different rooms and things like that, like, you will only see the things ghosts have said if you are in the room where they've said it. And kind of using, like, again, kind of a medium is the message type thing. Like, if we are limited by something like Discord, like, maybe we can't create jump scares, but we can create a lot of kind of gated information, even just by virtue of having, like, you know, a branching collection of chat logs.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun. I think that is a very interesting topic of looking at the bounds and the differences of horror in a game, and especially horror in a tabletop medium versus a video game versus, like, you know, Chris, you had earlier referenced Evil Within, which is an excellent sort of AAA psychological horror game, and it's very interesting seeing the ways that it plays with a lot of things. And like, I haven't actually played it, but I've watched playthroughs of it, and it's interesting seeing the things that it does, and that it really takes advantage of the medium that it's in, that it's a video game that you're sitting and playing with a controller or a keyboard and mouse, and what are the ways it can mess with you with that. And that's one of the things that I think also, like Tyler had mentioned with Quietest Dread, of taking advantage of your medium. What do you have? How do you go through it? This Discord has ghosts. And that thing of, if you have, like, I was lucky enough, really good role players, Andy, role player. And I was just like, no, you woke up in a room. Go. That's all I'm telling you. You woke up in a room. Do something with it. Is one of those things that really does depend on the strengths of a table in that building a story together. One of the things that I want to talk to you, and this is a little bit, this kind of starts to also segue into some of the things that we were talking about around safety. This is a question that I've brought up before. Chelsea asked in the Discord. As you GM, is there, basically, does the stuff that is happening in the world strongly affect how you build a game? Because, for example, way back in the beginnings of the COVID times, since we refer to pre-COVID as the before times, but in the beginning of this era, I was like, I kind of want to, distract myself. Last of Us is on for free, and fire that game up, and then I was like, no, this is not a good game for my mental health right now. This is not the story I need to consume of, pandemic apocalypse. Yay, no, thank you. And do you find that that's an issue that has come up for you? Is that a thing that you think about of like, okay, but these events are going on, and how does that play into conversations around starting up again?
As a designer, I think that it is complicated. And really what it comes down to is the intent of the designer. Because like I've kickstarted games, I've, both as a creator and as a backer. And anytime there's like a hot button political thing, and this was the case with COVID, like 90 different people put up like here's like buy all the toilet paper at the grocery store, the board game, or like here's build the wall, the card game. And there's like a big difference between a designer seeing like, oh, this is something that is in the public consciousness and I'm going to like seize on this zeitgeist and like the keywords, and I'm going to build a game around that because everyone's talking about it anyway. Why shouldn't they be talking about it while giving me money? It's more complicated to, and I think it's also more difficult to make a game that like meaningfully tackles some really fraught topics. Things like, the reality of the pandemic and the loss that is happening because of it. There's a game coming out called Rosenstrasse that has a lot to do with like Jews during the Holocaust. And that is a game that is, the designers are being very, very, very careful with, but also are using to have some like very important conversations, with a number of different people.
One.
Yeah. And it's one of those games.
As a person who was raised Jewish, like I wonder about it because I don't know the game, but I think that that's a hard line to do with.
And that's why like they are Jewish
as Jews. Like I don't know, it just
they are Jewish designers.
A little funky.
They're working with the like Holocaust museums, and like I don't think that a non-Jewish designer should even like. I get squeamish around people like running World War II campaigns. But like that is the headset you need to go in with, because like, yes, that is something that like, I don't really like even, like wuxia type fantasy campaigns that are really just like, oh, let's all, claim Japanese traditions as white people. And like have fun with like that and stereotypes of honor and what have you that we've seen in films. Like you have a very gut reaction to even just like the existence of this game. And imagine how like someone would feel if a loved one died of COVID and they like their friends are like, hey, we're gonna go play like this variation of werewolf where one of us has the virus and we all die. And I think that like it's not something that I really have the qualifications or the desire to design something that fraught. But as a GM, as a player, even with things like running a game of Dungeons and Dragons, you never know what kind of things people are bringing with them to games. Whether it is their, personal identity, religious, racial, otherwise, or even just the experiences they've had. And that's why safety tools are so important. Specifically, like the first one that I think of and one that has been coming up in a lot of the games I've been playing online is the idea of lines and veils. Do y'all do that?
We haven't implemented the Lines and Veils system, though I am familiar with it.
Yeah. So what it is, and you touched on this earlier as well. It's just pre-game. You talk through like what are our lines and what are our veils. You kind of touched on this with the romance game. A line would be, this is something that we definitely don't want to cross. We do not want to have it in our game at all. And I've been frank with a lot of people when playing games online, saying that like a line for me is I don't want any world-threatening virus in this game. Like that's not what I'm coming here for. Like you might think it's fun and funny to have a virus killing all the dragons and, you know, D&D land, but like that's not what I want to spend time with. And similarly, things that other people have brought is like, hey, they don't want any violence against children, like incidental or otherwise. Don't mention it, don't bring it up in the game. A line is a hard line that as a group beforehand, you know, no questions asked, you agree not to cross. A veil is something that is more akin to a PG-13 movie. So say we decide that something we want to draw a veil over is graphic sex. You know, that is something like, okay, we are comfortable with characters, you know, being sexual beings in the world of this game and acknowledging that sex is something that exists. But we're not going to put us in a situation where like the GM and a player are role-playing in front of us, you know? And so instead, they're like, all right, we are comfortable walking to this point, but then we're going to kind of cut to this other location. We're going to pull a veil across these things. We're never going to explicitly explain them, but it isn't as hard a line of thing as saying that like, hey, you know, no Nazis in our game. Things like that.
And a related, and similarly, one of the tools I think generally we use most frequently is either the Monty Cook gaming consent and gaming checklist or modifications thereof, which its stoplight system falls very much in that. Green, we're fine with it. Yellow, not graphic, not on screen, not the focal point. It can be backstory, it can be mentioned, it can be the fade to black. Red is do not bring it in any way. This is a problem. And I think that that's a really useful tool as well for just here's a thing to do. Let's look over this. Let's get this. And having it divested into a tool can also make it easier to have GM to player conversations. And then what are you comfortable with around disclosing to other people? How do we want this, you know, safe and sensitive about it? Because one of the things that I think also comes up for me is the avoidance of trauma in a game should not in of itself end up acting as a trigger for more trauma. You should not have to, let me disclose this thing. This is very painful for me in order to explain. It's like, okay, I've had players who are like, this cannot happen. I'm like, great. You never need to say anything about this. I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen. Obviously, I won't DM with it, and I'll have a talk with other players. It's not going to come from you. It's from me. Fine. We don't need to relive. And then move on. But yeah, I think that any of those pre-conversation tools are super important. And
part of that is just normalizing those conversations.
Yeah.
Like, you know, if you are consistent enough in being, you know, checking in with players, being open and accepting and encouraging of things, then, you know, hopefully it's become something that, you know, it's less fraught for people to, you know, express the things that they're not comfortable with. And also, like, as people who enjoy role-playing games, as people who have, like, you know, learned things or found emotional growth through role-playing games, you also never want to, as a GM, like, trick someone into a therapy session. Like, that is definitely something that someone should come to, like, willingly and knowingly. And, like, maybe between sessions, you can be like, hey, so is this something you want to explore with your character? Or, you know, was that just something we touched on? As opposed to just like, I smell trauma. Let's really like dig into that.
I think, Rachel, I know from conversations we've had personally, you're playing in a campaign that's done a really good job with that.
Yeah, I'm so it's not a horror campaign, but it's a extreme emotional trauma campaign, in that it's like takes place in kind of real world but not this world kind of a thing. And so it's with my friends here in person, and we play in my backyard 6 feet apart before the snow comes, I guess. But we've had like our characters are all very fucked up in a lot of ways, and like bad things have happened to kind of take them there. So it's been good because our DM, he is very good about, saying like, hey, we're going to be talking about these kind of intense things here. I just wanted to give you a heads up. If at any point you don't want to talk about it, just tell me, or we'll just move on, or we'll just do this. But like I had a character that like none of us knew about our pasts, and then we all kind of find out about our pasts. And in my past, I learned that my character kind of had a Judas moment. My character is very Christian, and they had a Judas moment where they kind of betrayed the people and did the things, and everybody was real mad at me. And like, it's hard to role play with your friends where everybody hates you. You know what I mean? Like, it's supposed to be like a fun thing with the group when you're working together. And when you get to this point of where like, you're playing this character that at that moment, like nobody likes, and with reason, and you have to, it's good. Like, I am very close with my friends, and it's been good. We were able to, talk about it, but it was hard. Like, there were points where I had to talk to them afterwards, and I had to be like, I legitimately feel like nobody likes me right now as Rachel, like, so like, but to kind of even maybe after playing have that decompression moment where like we can kind of just talk as people, and I can let them know like, hey, that was really hard for these reasons, and then it can be a good kind of conversation over it.
Yeah, and that's also, I think so much of that is being aware of like, who are you playing with? Like, I know y'all run a lot of Grant Howitt's games, and those are excellent con games. They're largely one-shots, simple rules, engaging premise. You can basically just like put a looking for group flag on a table, and whoever comes by is fine. But there are plenty of other RPGs that I would never feel comfortable like just picking up with strangers if I don't know if we're all on the same page as far as like what we even want out of a game or are comfortable with.
Yeah, definitely. We can't hear you, Heather.
Sorry, I muted myself. I've got stuff happening here.
Okay. I see mouth moving, but I don't hear anything.
Yes. Even for the one shots, I feel like you should know your players' limits at least somewhat. I would never feel comfortable just picking up with strangers, because even with a short beforehand talk, I don't know them well enough to know if, okay, so this is a campaign in which players can go after other players if they want. That's something that I don't like happening, or I won't let happen. And so I need to know that players aren't going to be doing that. Throwing wrenches in.
And part of that is the verbs of the game. Mm-hmm. I think it's on players to be informed of like kind of what the pitch is for the game, and I think designers should make concise pitches for what makes their game different from others. But also, as a designer, it is on you to think about what are the verbs you're providing players with, where they could potentially use that to throw a wrench in things. What kind of actions are you allowing? Like, do you allow, like, if you design a mechanic for like, here is player-to-player conflict resolution, that's fine and well and good, and it might help in some situations, but you are planting the seed of player-to-player conflict. You can just as easily add a rule that says like, hey, if there's a conflict, like, this is how it happens. Or just say like, hey, in the backstory of this game, you are always people who love each other and would never harm each other. And like, if you include that rule, then like, that's the rule, so part of it is just also like thinking, okay, is this the kind of game that is like we are bears going on a heist, where I feel like, you know, I'm not risking anything picking up and playing this at a local hobby shop? Or is this a game like a D&D where there are so many verbs that it isn't just like, you know, wear a hat or steal something. It is like all of the different actions that an autonomous individual would be capable of. Then, like, yeah, you should be more hesitant because, you know, there are more opportunities for people to like use those verbs in ways you're not comfortable with.
Yeah, I guess I perhaps thought of it in an opposite way with the fewer verbs that left the players more open to their own imaginations. And I'm thinking specifically of the horror one shot coming up, that, you know, I don't want like players going after other players. And so, yeah, I can simply say that. But I was, you know, to me, the one-page one-shots leave the players just wide open to.
Yeah, like there's a lot more range, because often with that, as you get to fewer verbs, I would say, because this is something that I experienced running Night Hag, you know, the entire sort of rule around player actions, if the players want to do something that's within the limits of human ability but not connected to their profession, spend a die. Great, simple, easy mechanic, gets you that things are deteriorating feel that we were talking about, Rachel, but it's also like, okay, do you spend a die to drive a car that's within the limits of human ability, and I don't know how that's directly, you know, and so there's a lot of that sort of judgment call as a DM and as a player, and I think that that's conversations beforehand help with that, and just expectation setting. One of the things that we've talked about before on here is definitions of good and successful in tabletop RPGs, and the one that I always come back to is if the DM and all the players had fun, that was a good session. It can be tense, it can be growth, it can be lots of laughs, it can be horror, it doesn't matter, but if everyone there was having fun, that's what you should be building toward. And so I think it's absolutely legitimate, and I include the DM in that list because I've actually seen that advice before online of, if all the players have had fun, it was successful. And I'm like, DM is also a human being that deserves to have fun. So if you're like, hey guys, this will not be fun for me if y'all go after each other, legit.
It really is, yeah, and it's something that I've been struggling with as a designer as well. A couple of my games have more or less like auto succeed mechanics, and I've genuinely been struggling with, you know, how much do I want to design for bad behavior? You know, like, is it my job as the designer or as the GM to, you know, to say to players, don't be an asshole, and like, do I need to spend word count on it, assuming that the people who are playing my game, you know, might be assholes? And it's, I don't know. I don't think there's a simple answer for it, because, yeah, it is a hobby that, you know, like a lot of other hobbies, but especially within like gaming, there's very toxic fan base as well as a very constructive one. So, you know, it's understandable to have those fears in the back of your mind. Probably the most blunt approach that I've seen to it is the Olivia Hill rule. Have you heard of the Olivia Hill rule?
I don't believe I have.
Olivia Hill is a designer, wrote a great game called #IHunt, which is basically like Tinder for monster hunting. But they include this text at the top of the game, and they encourage anyone to publish it in their games if they'd like. If you're a fascist, you're not welcome to play this game. It's against the rules. If you're reading this and thinking, you just call everyone you disagree with a fascist, then you're probably a fascist, or incapable of drawing inferences from context and acknowledging a dangerous political climate that causes the oppressed to be hyperbolic. Don't play this game. Heal yourself. Grow. Learn. Like, you can say that the same way that, like, you can have on a character sheet a field for pronouns, you know, and not only does that create a permission structure for someone to choose the pronouns they're most comfortable with for their player, it's also just a rule. Like if someone doesn't call their character by the correct pronouns, they're breaking the rules because it's a rule. Like you can put a rule that just says like, if you're an asshole, you're not allowed to play my game. And, you know, just trust that that will self-sort out people who are like, think they might be assholes.
I was gonna say, if you reacted to this rule,
Yeah.
why though?
I didn't mean to derail us into a different topic.
Oh no!
No, this is all like part and parcel of, you know, like safety and consent and things like that as well.
Yeah.
Because it's, you know, playing a horror game with friends is fraught enough, let alone with strangers, you know. And there are some folks who love to go to the theme park on Fright Night and sign a waiver that says like, yeah, I don't care, the ghouls can touch me, I'm here to be scared. You know, it's not for everyone. And people should be informed as to what they're signing up for.
I think that is true.
You go, Chris.
Okay, well, I was just going to say, I think that's true, especially like for what Helpful Goat does and all the other podcasts who you know, play D&D, or sometimes we play games and we stream that. It's a trigger warning goes hand in hand with the consent for the players. Putting that trigger warning out there at the very beginning, if you know what your content for that evening is going to kind of consume some of this, or it's going to involve some of this, putting that out there for the listeners and the people who are or just watching is important as well, because they're part of the same community of the players. And so, I mean, yeah, the players are having a good time, the GM's having a good time, but you know, some people may start watching something and they're like, oh, whoa, I was not okay with this. I was unaware. So I think that is something that's important to incorporate with the world that we're in as far as playing everything online.
Yeah, no, 100%. And and I think that's a thing. For a very brief digression, and then I'm going to have us take a quick break, a little bit past the mid. I think that's a really, really interesting.
I'm muted. I'm sorry. I was trying to say something, and then I realized that I don't want to interrupt you. You can say your thing, but I did want to say one thing before you went to break. That's all.
Oh, yeah, cool. Yeah, I wasn't like jumping out to break immediately.
No, I was like, why is nobody responding to... Oh, right.
And see, I had looked down to collect my thoughts, so I wasn't looking at it and like having the same thing of mouth is moving, but I'm not hearing anything. I think that's really interesting because I really like the point that you made, Chris, that a lot of tabletop RPGs, even in ones that have a sort of more traditional GM and player structure, Andy and I will both talk about the fact that they're collaborative storytelling. You're not walking... I write books. You're not walking through one of my books. This isn't me reading you a book. I'm changing and shaping things every time the Marauders do something really weird that I didn't expect. Every time you succeed on a roll in a way that I didn't, and I want to reward the fact that you got a nat 20 on something. Okay, I'm moving some parts, or I'm making an entirely new sort of bridge to something that wasn't there before, because we're building this together, and that's a part that I love. But I think that you also strike on when you're streaming this, when you're podcasting this, when you're... One of the things that I love about doing what we do in the media that we do is the fact that, Rachel, when you're in chat and saying things, obscene things sometimes, that can become a part of the game as well. You have involvement. It isn't, maybe you're not the one making the rolls, maybe, but very much to your point, Chris. I really love the way you phrased that. The listeners and the viewers are there with the players, and they deserve a level of protection. They deserve a level of, in a very spoiler-free way, we've had some very intense moments in Fates of Rin. We've had some pretty intense moments in Tyr, and staff at Helpful Goat, we had conversations around, okay, how much do we disclose in this? Because we don't want people to be like, surprise, trauma. Except that's shitty. Bad thing to do. But at the same time, you know, Rachel, for example, like, so I keep picking on you for examples, but like, you hate spoilers. And so it's that tension of, where do we walk between this? If we don't want to give everything away, but we also want to sometimes, we don't want just our generic content warning if we swear a lot and stuff can happen. It's like, yeah, stuff can happen, but we know stuff happened in this one. So maybe we kind of owe it to people to
Oh yeah, I don't mind
buckle
content.
up a little bit.
Sure.
So yeah, sorry. Before we get a break, you'd had something you wanted to say.
I just wanted to say too, because the question itself also was talking about like avoiding particular content and things, and I was thinking about the consent form that I used for my upcoming game, and some of the things on there were social things, so it was like racism, transphobia, homophobia, and things like that. And I just wanted to bring up that I think that I'm sure that there are probably ways that those things could be utilized in games in a meaningful way. But I also think that you have to think about who you are as a person. And maybe if you are like a cishet white person and you're playing with a bunch of cishet white people, that you're not role playing racism or homophobia or transphobia, or like, because then that's like gamifying people's everyday lives and the things they have to deal with. So like if you're a heterosexual person and you're like role playing struggling with people being homophobic or this or that, I think that while it could make your character more deep and other things like that, I also think that it can cross a line where you're kind of gamifying people's actual struggles.
And it can super quickly hit caricature because I am deeply aware of within, for example, even like Fates of Rin with the family and playing Charity, a tiefling, who we've enacted some of that with the fan base. I'm like, but I've had a conversation with Andy of like, I don't want to lean too much into this. I'm a white man. I do not know what that looks like. I know it sucks. I know it hates it. And I know it hates it. Good. Good.
Yeah,
Good.
I hate it.
Good. We're doing real well with the verbs. And I trust Andy where it's like, it's always obvious and evident and apparent that this is not a good. We're not trying to normalize these behaviors, etc. But we've had those conversations like, I don't want to lean too much into this. This isn't my place to do this. This is a real thing. And I think that again, it goes back for me. And when I've been thinking about this, it goes back to this is someone's trauma. This is a lot of people's trauma. And it's not mine. And so inflicting that on them when they are sitting down for D&D podcast time is I'm like, okay, there's a lot of really, really, really great streamers and podcast people. One of the most prominent is Critical Bard, who's been very active in talking race relations and what it means to be black in the TTRPG space and all of these things. And seriously, go look them up, follow their channel on Twitter. They're amazing. They're amazing. Hosting roundtables that have also been amazing. But it's like, that's not, I get real uncomfortable real quick.
And I think one of the Dungeons and Dragonsification of the hobby is that a lot of people feel like every game has to be for everyone, because D&D is very much kind of marketed by like Wizards of the Coast and by extension Hasbro as like the world's greatest role-playing game, the only game you need. Like you can run everything in D&D. Why learn a new game when you can just hack D&D? When really, like, yeah, there are so many other small games that do things, like that are designed to create safe spaces, that are designed to create specific, conversations, and also games that are, like not being sold in Barnes and Nobles across the country. There are so many indie designers who are creating games about their experience, as like a marginalized people, for marginalized people to play these games together and have safe spaces to like have those conversations. There are so many queer-centric games that like I'm glad exist. Yeah. Like Thirsty Sword Lesbians is kickstarting right now. But also like that's, that's a great game for, you know, like like-minded queer folk to, you know, have a game that like is for once catering to them.
That
It's
doesn't
not
just
my
see them,
opportunity,
but is
to,
built
like,
for them. Yeah.
yeah, it's not my opportunity to be like, well, how can I hack this game for me? Just because everyone looks at D&D and is like, well, if you like the game is the game, you know, I can do whatever I want with it. When sometimes the game like dictates what you should and shouldn't do with it.
Great. I think we'll take a quick break there, probably about 8 minutes. Come back at 8:20 my time, and then we'll keep going with questions. Thank you so much for watching, everybody, and we will be back real soon here.
All right.
Hey everybody, back. Ready for Chelsea to confirm that she can see and hear us. Slash confirm for myself when I see it pop up. Thank you, Twitch, with your 5 to 30 second delay. It's awesome.
Oh, wonderful.
In the first half, we talked about a lot of topics for building horror scenes, types of horror that we like, and also sort of started to talk about consent and ways that you can build in the players still having some agency, still being safe, still having this be fun for everyone instead of deeply traumatic. Thank you, Chelsea. Much love. And actually, this is really interesting. In Discord, Matt asked whether in gaming or not. Personal question to open this back up. What do you most like to be scared by, and what do you least like to be scared by? And leading that one off for me is actually the stuff that I most like to be scared by, which is also very, very effective at scaring me, is precisely the type of scary stuff that I like to DM with, is the psychological horror. It is the what is happening, what is going on. I'm not entirely sure of what reality is in that sense of the thread slipping away just a little bit, that grasp slipping just a little bit. The thing that I least like to be scared by is jump scares. I startle very, very easily. I do not enjoy it. I don't even find it scary. It's just, okay, sudden loud noise. I jump. I hate this. Please
See,
make
I am
it
the
stop.
exact opposite because I also startle very easily. Like, loud noises and sudden movements startle me a lot, but I fucking love jump scares. I love the suspense of like, and when they like, it's my absolute favorite. I hate it and I love it. And I'm scared by, I could have a friend grab a bag of chips in front of me and the loud crinkle suddenly, and I'm like, the fuck. Like, it's just, I'm very
Wow.
easily startled. Yeah, no, it's a thing.
I was
It has
getting
been.
ready for like Chris to just suddenly shout because like I see
wanted to, but I was
You're like-
trying to be considerate of everyone else's ears.
like I'm
Give us that jump scare.
Yeah.
Yes, I love it.
I mean, that is a big part of why, like, Galway knows when we play Fortnite together and I get startled by sudden things. I don't always have control of my faculties, and like a string of
so she
expletives
pisses
usually.
herself. And
I
then
do.
she
It's terrible.
cusses like a sailor.
It's
drunk
terrible. I do
on
cuss
rum.
like Galway
I mean-
can attest to. I won't say on stream.
I am not going to say the things you say on stream.
Right.
I've said some stuff, but it's not like I'm gonna like. It's like when I get startled, everything just leaves, and I just really like just
She
having it.
greets
I-
things.
I will also say that there is a distinct knock-on effect when Rachel gets startled in Fortnite, because Rachel gets startled, sort of stops playing the game in the startle response. The startle response releases a torrent of obscenity, which then causes me to stop playing the game because I'm like, Jesus Christ, what did you just say? And then we
get
lose.
rather impressed at what she goes off, because it's like, and now this isn't even what the question was about anymore. But it's just, we're all about Rachel
wait,
now,
how did we
and
switch
her
to Rachel's
excretion of
obscenities?
But I do like that is a big thing, is I like being startled. I think because it happens so easily that it's like it's I don't know. It reminds me kind of like a roller coaster or something, right? Where you're like going up very slowly. It feels kind of like that, where it's just like this anticipation, and then when like something finally happens, I really kind of like that type of thing.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and like Sam said in the chat, we read together most nights, and there could be some times where he just starts talking, and I'm like, ah! We're literally only talking to each other on the phone. It's fine. Anyway, other people
fine.
can answer the question
good.
now. Sorry.
For me, I love the subtle scare. The best way I can describe it is when you're watching a movie. We just got done binging The Haunting of Bly Manor, whatever that is on Netflix. Just got done binging that last night, and it's those little subtle background things that you catch out of the corner, and just a quick glimpse to where you have to be like, did I just really see that? Hold on, let me rewind that. And those are great, like in real life too. Like, and not like there are monsters walking around. There really are. We just don't always see them. But you know, those things that you see or you hear where you're like, wait, did that really just happen? And then you kind of have to backtrack. Kind of like Rachel, do you remember me sharing, was it last week, 2 weeks ago, when I was writing about the story about the old woman who inspired me at the grocery store? Things like that, where you're just like, wait, you are a real live human being, but you startled the fuck out of me because you look like a monster. Sorry, lady who look like a monster, but it's those kind of things. I love those so very much. I don't like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what I don't like as far as being scared in real life. I guess.
You enjoy all the forms of terror.
Yes, I really do. I kind of do.
Unpopular opinion on my part, but I don't think I like being scared. Like it's not really something I actively pursue. I know that for some folks, like it's fun, but I think I do gravitate more towards like less fear and more like unsettled. You know, like I like the mystery. I like the, you know, the piecing together of, you know, or like finding the face in the cracks in the wall. But as far as like genuine horror, like I don't know, I'm very squeamish. I don't want to like have gore explained to me. It's not something I really pursue. But that's also why I tend towards games that are more like, you know, less the like the gore fest kind of horror and more the like more on the Twin Peaks end of horror. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, there are horrific moments. There is a lot of weird, unsettling stuff going on, but it is more of like a surreal horror than a like try to scare you horror.
I
like
think
a horror of people. Yeah.
It's not the necessarily in your face all the time horror. It's the things that unsettle you, like the things that you're catching out of the corner of your eye. I'm not a big fan of jump scares. And I don't mind them in a movie. In real life, ooh. I've been known to punch people for jump scaring me. But in games, I will gravitate more toward the not outright terror, but the weird,
the disquieting, the unsettling, the what is happening. Yeah.
And I think I remember when the movie Blair Witch came out and everybody talked about like how scary it was, and I went to go see it and I was just like, I don't understand this movie. Like, what? How is it scary? And like I get like other people's reasoning and stuff, but yeah, it was just like the lack of any actual like scare stuff didn't really. And I also like as I've gotten older, I've become much wimpier about things. I used to be horror obsessed. Like I sat in the, you know, front row of all the different like horror movie releases, and I used to go with my sister to see every single Saw movie as it was released on Halloween weekend. And it was like I was telling, I mean, I have encyclopedia of serial killers behind me in my bookcase. Like it's a whole thing. But I think that like people also evolve and change over time too, where people are either more okay with it or less okay with it. And I don't really know what I like anymore, because like it just keeps on changing what it is that actually affects and bothers me.
Yeah, and like I've been trying to get into more horror writing because I know there are, you know, a lot of fantastic horror writers, and it's a blind spot. And I think it is kind of a calculation of deciding like, all right, am I right in the right headspace that I'm willing to dip my toes in here and see if there's something that I missed. And it's also okay to be like, nope, and pull back again for a couple years.
And I think this is kind of an interesting question. Chat from of if gameplay consent agrees on something, no gore, no sexual content, etc., do you set that tone for the general public audience comments in your live chat forum? So with the Twitch chat, etc. And I wanted to take this one on very briefly because me as the tech side of Helpful Goat, that's actually not something that I'd really fully considered before, and I think it's a really, really interesting point. I would say that generally one of the things that I value in terms of being part of Helpful Goat, and I've expressed this before, I expressed this in our public service sort of announcements and pay attention to the world thing. One of the things that I am most proud of with regard to my involvement in Helpful Goat, and that I am humbled by, are the amazing people that we have in the community. Amazing, they are really supportive, they are really loving. And I think that the chat, we're also lucky enough to have a strong community interested in what we're doing, and the chat often very closely mirrors what's going on. It's probably going to be said obscenely by Rachel, but within those bounds, I think that the chat usually follows the ebb and flow type of content that we're having. And I think that that's also something that, while I don't think I've ever thought of it in those terms, and I actually really appreciate the question thing to think about, that's certainly something that our mods and the rest of our chat would be like, well, no, we're not doing this, so no, this isn't the moment for that. This is not rando Twitch chat. Thanks. Break it down a little bit. We want you to have fun. We want you to participate. But we get a lot of participation modeled. There are lots of hearts in our chat. So I think that's so that's kind of my answer to that. And it's not really a complete answer, but it is a very interesting question. It's one I'm going to think about more. And I really like that. So sort of the central theme, and we've been touching on this a lot already. So this last portion will probably be a little more freeform. Like, but how do you work to keep players safe while making things scary? I would certainly say we've talked about have a conversation about what it means to be scary and what it means to be okay. Have a conversation about the game that you're playing. Dread would be a very different experience than retconned D&D versus X other game. But what are some of the other ways that, like, you know, I pick on you, but I know, like, Rachel and Heather, this is a thing that is on your minds right now to some degree, because you're going into this, you're about to start this up, and you're also, I would say both of you are playing with a fair number of players, not all of whom you know. You know, like, this isn't like, oh yeah, here's my normal D&D group and I'm doing a one-shot horror with them, that's all fine. Like, I remember, unrelated, you know, not a horror theme, but like, I remember when I did Amberheart, and it was almost entirely people that I hadn't played with before, and like, I had a lot of anxiety.
Except me.
Except for Chris. But now you played with us so much and you love us.
Ew.
The Marauders are his favorite.
Yeah.
I think I took the Monty Cook consent in gaming form and added a ridiculous number of things to checkboxes because, you know, I just wanted to make sure, okay, this is, people are going to be exposed to my inner dark, like, these are things that creep me out. And I want to make sure that it's not going to trigger anybody. So I just put on anything I could think of that, you know, might make somebody extremely uncomfortable. And because I wanted to make sure that, all right, if you see someone drowning, or, you know, if certain things happen, whether or not they're happening to your character, I don't want to scar you, or I don't want to bring up actual anxiety. So I'm counting on them to really take a look at those and let me know.
Any,
And I think it's.
any of Heather's players, that's a reminder.
I still need 2 of mine to fill out their frickin' consent forms.
You're
I
the week
forgot to.
after.
I was the first one.
You were. I forgot to.
Overachiever.
I used a Google Docs or a Google
Form.
polls like form thing to do it. Forgot, didn't notice it didn't have a section for name. So don't know whose responses or whose, and I don't know who's filled it out. I know Chris has. I know my friend Blair has. I think Adam has. Yep, he did. He just said. So I think, yeah, I've got to bug the other 2.
But we love uncertainty. Be there.
Chris would never lie.
Although that is a point. They could be anonymous. I mean,
right. So I did make mine anonymous, but then I think that it's actually good to not have them be anonymous because somebody put a yellow on something that I wanted to ask a clarifying question on. I don't know who did it. So now I need to like probe people, which is, you know, super great.
There's only
like,
3 of us, so
I know, right?
yeah. So
and
if you put yellow on one of her forms,
right? But I like to do, yeah, because Galway. I played in Night Hag last week, and Galway contacted me, like DM'd me separately over one of the things I'd filled out, and was like, "Hey, I noticed you put a yellow on this. This is what I'm thinking. Is this okay?" And it very much like I was like, "Oh yeah, it's totally fine." Because it's also like sometimes you're like, "Well, I don't really think I'll have a problem with this, but I might." So, like, you know, it's kind of hard to be like, I don't want to explicitly do this thing, but I guess if it's here, it's fine. You know, it's kind of hard to always know. And so it was nice to just be, you know, to ask for that clarification.
God, Sam.
yeah, absolutely.
What's happening? Oh my God, Sam. Anyway,
We're getting back to that Cookie Sea
Sam.
Monsters question being more relevant.
So
Sam's always appropriate around, you know.
something I wanted to ask, when you guys are playing and streaming, do you use any like other than like pre-prep session 0 type stuff, do you use any safety or consent tools during play? Like the X card?
Yes, so exactly. For Night Hag, I also employed X card because generally I don't think we have, but particularly in the context of a horror game. And I would say that I normally utilize, I normally say to all of my players, if something comes up and it's bad, if this is not good, if this is bad, tell me, we stop, that's fine. I care more about my players being okay than I do about the game, the stream, any of this. Like, that's the most important thing. So normally we have that as a conversation, and that's a thing that we reaffirm and we talk about in the sort of post session as well, making sure everything's okay. For that one, I wanted to make sure we had that system, and I simply programmed it into Roll20, so like they had a button action.
Yeah, so to explain to folks who might not be familiar, the X card is a safety tool created by John Stavropoulos. And what it is it's just a very simple piece of RPG tech where you have a note card that you have an X on, and then at any point during the game, anyone has the agency to just reach out and like non-verbally tap it on the table. And that is a clear sign that like not comfortable with something. And that can either be a moment where like you stop and talk about it, or you can just like, without breaking the improv, like veer away from that. And it's also something that can be very easy to do in a Roll20, you know, whether it is like even just like typing a big X on the screen and watching to see if your players like ping it in their color. It is one of those things where like, because we also don't want to conflate, you know, like session zeros as like binding contracts. Mm-hmm. You know, you never want to say to a player like, well, you didn't flag the I don't want this in the game box, so you're not allowed to complain about it now. You know, the same way that like, you know, anyone is allowed to say at any point during an evening, regardless of what was said beforehand, that like, hey, I don't want to have sex, or hey, I'm not comfortable with this thing. Because things
Tend to
change,
be revoked at
situations
any
change. And so the X card is a very useful tool in giving people the agency during play, because maybe someone is intimidated by a large list, or maybe it's not an anonymous list, and they don't necessarily want to like out themselves as being uncomfortable with something. Making sure that there are methods and permission structures for people to express themselves during play is important as well. And if the X card isn't quite nuanced enough for your table, there are two other very similar tools that kind of add degrees to it, similar to the way that Lines Unveiled do. There's the Consent Flower by Taylor Stokes. It is very similar to the red light, green light, yellow light of that you can do during a session 0 of establishing what's cool, what isn't cool. But it's again just 3 cards, or in an online forum, 3 colors that you have the opportunity for people to non-verbally tap, whether like, I like where the scene is going, keep going. And it could even just be like, the equivalent of like dropping a heart in a chat. Someone just tapping the green card being like, yes, like this is fun. Or the yellow as like, I'm hesitant about this, maybe slow it down. Or the red for an immediate swerve. A very similar tool is Script Change by Bree Sheldon. You have your rewind, your pause, your fast forward. And again, the idea of all of these is having something physical, tangible on the table or in the online play space that players can non-verbally, if they don't feel, because it can be intimidating to speak up and like derail a GM, to non-verbally indicate that they aren't feeling comfortable. So rewind is actually a chance for someone to say like, hey, this scene like did not turn out how I thought it was going to. Can we actually like go back and kind of retcon? Pause is just that, like, hey everybody, let's stop. Even if it's just stopping to like have a chance to like take a cigarette break or something. Maybe it's content that you're like, okay, I'm cool with this. It's just like, let's pause for a second. Or fast forward, which is very much like a veil of saying like, all right, we're cool that like, these 2 characters went home together, but now I'm more comfortable if we like skip to the next morning.
I think that it's also good to discuss what is off the table with the players too, like not just for the GM to know, but to actually like, I know at the beginning of Spire we talked about like, Elise told us, that this is off the table, this is, this, and this, so that we could kind of know. And I think that it was good because as in one of the other times that we played, and I talked to Elise about this afterwards too, that kitty cat, where there was something, and it wasn't a big deal. It was just, there was something going on and it triggered something in my mind where I remembered, oh crap, one of the things that was specifically said we're not supposed to do is relationships among player characters, or like, romantic relationships among them or whatever it was exactly. And so I chimed in after it was going on for a little while, like, hey, we're not supposed to do this, because and like she didn't tell us obviously who said which thing. I just remembered that somebody had said it. And I think that's good too, because it like, when you discuss it with the players, everybody kind of knows. But then if you're playing for a while, if it's not just a one shot, you're playing for a while and people forget, then it's like everybody at some point had this and somebody can jump in and like be the reminder person too for when things are forgotten, And I
think that's important.
All of this doesn't fall on the GM either. Like, right. GMs are also players. Like, any GM should feel just as comfortable, like, speaking up if players are, taking a scene in a direction they're not comfortable with.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things of I actually forgot to do it. But usually when I request this Monty Cook consented gaming form, I give it to all of my players. I also give them mine. Where I'm like, hey, there's some stuff that you can do that I'm just going to be 100% not okay with. I don't want to run the game with that in it. I do not want to stretch to this, and a lot of it goes to the earlier conversation having around them. Like there's some stuff around identities that I don't have, and I don't want to DM because I don't want this to be tried. Like, sorry, I can't. There's elements of this I'm just not. And I think that that's a really important thing that in the sort of instruction manual or in the zeitgeist of this can sometimes get lost. Of them, like, them should fill that out for themselves. Of like, hey, great, all of my players are totally okay with explicit sex scenes involving players and NPCs. Am I? No, no, I'm not. I don't want to DM that. I'm just no. Sorry, not for me. And so I think that is a really interesting part of it, and it's actually a thing that I'd actually been bouncing this idea around in my head. Moontree has been going on long enough at this point that I was actually going to run a refresh on the consent forms, because I think it's worth looking at. Hey, this is what you put down then. Is that still true? Has anything changed? Let's have a conversation about those. And to a huge point that had been going on in the Twitch chat while we've been talking, that was why I do love pairing it with, much to sort of your question, Tyler, something like this card or any of those other tools, which I hadn't been as familiar with, but sound really interesting. Because sometimes you don't know that something is going to have been a red until you hit it. And sometimes that thing isn't going to have been a red if that thing hadn't happened earlier in the day. And that's all totally valid. And that's all totally important. And that's all, it's not that, well, God damn it, if we'd had this scene a day earlier, it could have gone off as planned. No, I just care that my player is upset. Or I'm upset. Or, like, no, that's the focus.
I think that, a big part of it is just like, not just using these in horror games, like the thing that's like going to destigmatize it and make it easier for players to express themselves is if you just like casually incorporate it into whatever. As far as the things I was talking about, if anyone's interested in them, goldenlassogames.com/tools has a great breakdown of the safety tools I mentioned. And also, like, to Galway's point about like refreshing, and like it sounds like you've done really great work, for your players as far as like safety and consent and things like that. But also, I think that like a lot of pressure is put on GMs. There are plenty of games out there that will award players experience for being the one who like takes a journal of what happened in the last play session. There are games that give players experience for, being the one who brings the chips. It doesn't always need to fall on the GM to, like, be telling the story, be like scheduling the time, and also being like, the one who's like trying to juggle all of like, okay, do I have this? Do I have that? Did I check this? Like, you can just like deputize someone to be like, hey, could you be the one to like, keep an eye on this during the game so that like the GM can focus on the story, and like you can, send him a ping if somebody tapped the X card and he didn't notice it, or say like, hey, could you be the one who like collects the surveys on these, because like, I have a busy week, and if you could have those to me by Friday, then I'll incorporate that into the prep I plan on doing Saturday and Sunday. Like, so much of what we expect GMs to do as far as safety is really just things that we should expect of players, of communities. It doesn't, like, to even the degree of the question about like what is acceptable in play versus what is acceptable in a chat. I think it is really just kind of like creating a culture across the board where it is not like the decision of the person at the top falling down to everyone else. And like what boxes have and haven't been checked, and just having a strong enough culture that like, hey, this is what flies here and this is what doesn't.
And I think that that's a thing that she's been strangely worded is also heavily involved in our community management. One of the things that I loved was when first or number one, you log in. Lead with kindness. Like, look, we're not claiming everyone's going to get it right 100% of the time. We're not claiming, but come from a good place. And if you're told that that's bad, that's, this is doing bad things to me, step back and appraise that. That's a thing that I would say our community that I love, that I feel like, and it's interesting because I very much enjoy the chance to do Goat's Eye Views and foster conversations around this. When you were commenting on, in the RPG space, it's perfectly possible to see the two camps that break out around this. And like, I remember Monty Cook Gaming putting out that sheet and just watching D&D Twitter devolve into the dude bro GMs who were like, yeah, if any of my players brought that shit to my table, I'd kick them out. And
see, I was on the opposite side of that because all of the indie designers were like, we've been doing this for years, and now Monty Cook just published it.
Yeah.
So like, it is the thing where like, it's so funny how, it really is just like the culture of, like what people expect and what people see this hobby as, and it's almost like, there are some folks who like what they're looking for in role playing is complete absolute freedom. And they see anything less than that as like not a true role playing experience. And there are other people who see it like, that kind of don't like it when games give them too much freedom because they drown in the possibilities. They're like, I'd like a more tightly designed game. Like, give me the game that is about repairing a dishwasher and making that a satisfying experience. Don't give me the option to repair or not repair the dishwasher. So yeah, it is tough.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that we also strive for here, and I think that very clear to us, is again that it took me a couple of Goat's Eye Views to eventually finally say it, from building up to it, but my definition of a successful night of tabletop RPGs is I've had fun and my players have had fun. So let's have the conversations that we need to have to make that fun. And let's keep having those conversations during the game night. And if something is veering into not fun, okay, let's move that around. Let's see what we can do with that. And on top of that, knowing that I feel super comfortable with the people that I'm fortunate enough to get to play this game with, that if someone isn't comfortable, that the consensus at the table, that the immediate feeling at the table is, how do we care for this? Not, oh shit, we've stepped on this scene, or why is the immersion been broken? So it's like, okay, is everybody okay? Let's make sure of that. And that was one of the things we talked about, the X card, and that there's various ways you can take that. I think I even said to you, I'm like, look, here's going to be the procedure. If I see an X card drop, I'm making sure someone meant to drop that X card. We had one X card go down that was not intended. Someone clicked the wrong button. But we're going to do that, and then we're going to pause. We're not going to hash this out on stream. We're just going to have a quick conversation about it. It's not going to be a big deal. We might be right back. We might be done for the night. It's all okay. But let's start there. Sorry. Just looking at chat. And Lena, repairing a dishwasher would be legit satisfying.
Yeah. I mean, one other very easy thing that you can do, whether you're playing with friends, strangers, or for an audience, is just give your sessions ratings. G, PG, PG-13, R, and let that rating dictate the discourse around the game as well. Like, if you're playing a rated G like Scooby-Doo mystery, then like enforce that same tone to your chat, in case like parents are watching it with their kids. Yeah. If you're explicitly playing something that is PG-13, then like, yeah, you can, let the chat get as raunchy as, the appropriate content, as long as everyone knows like, what movie they're attending.
Yeah. Looking through the remaining. I think one thing, and just to sort of wrap up and have on the way out, because I think that it's something that everyone here can relate to and have just sort of a thought about. of what recommendations do you have for players and GMs in talking about a horror? So like that was a really good one there. What movie are we at? Mm-hmm. Is this Scooby and the gang, or finding out that it was Old Man Jenkins, or is this Saw because someone else already invoked Saw? Those are very different movies to go to. That's a very different feel, and so I think that that's a super useful conversation to have generally. Obviously, I would also say, just as a note for everyone, this happens a lot when we do these. All of the comments that we have made about consent, informing your players, having open, honest conversations, this isn't actually, surprise, here's your what is actually real. This isn't actually about horror RPG. This is about playing games with each other. It's about interacting with each other, honestly. This is just communication. This is being there and being part of a community. So as much as we wanted to talk about what are scary things, what are things we like in horror games, this is also very much just about how do we want to play games together. So what conversations would you see as being super relevant? Either they're conversations that you would want the GM to have with you if you were a player, or that you want to have with your players if you're DMing or GMing.
I think that the biggest thing that I ask folks is, how long do you want it to be? Like before even getting into the exact content of, what kind of horror do we want to play? Just like, I'm a big fan of, like hard caps on games. You're like, hey, let's get together and, play a game for 3 hours and then kind of reconvene over like, all right, what are the options of like, what could we accomplish in 3 hours? Or to say like, hey, let's play a 3-session campaign and see like, because some games are better for campaign play, some are better for one-shot play. So really, like the conversation with me starts with like, how much time do we have to tell this story? How much energy do we want to invest in this? And then from there, like figuring out how much room for nuance do we have? Because that's going to dictate a lot of like what you actually have room to get into. And then from that, having those other conversations of like, what does winning look like for you? What are your favorite scary movies, etc.
Awesome.
I think, I think definitely the first question should be is this really your thing? Like, is this something you are actually going to enjoy? And what makes me think of that is when you guys were playing Night Hag last week, Andy, he was like, I don't even like horror. Why am I playing this? Like, it's like, it's like that's not necessarily his cup of tea, but he played it anyway. I mean,
he also loves playing them, and he sits in with Darcy constantly watching horror movies. So
yes,
there's a weird love-hate relationship that this man has with these.
But like as a player and as a GM, you need to actually take a look and see if this is actually something you are actually going to enjoy, and you're not just playing it to play it, or you feel pressured into playing it because they needed another person to play, or but just definitely, is this my cup of tea? Is this something that I'm going to enjoy? And then you decide, if you want to go forward. But I mean, obviously it also helps to know the style, the style of horror, like what are we into? I mean, are we doing, monsters and zombies? Are we doing, ghosts and demonic possession, stuff like that? You need to kind of have an idea. And then, if it's something you're like on the fence about, maybe play during the day.
I think for me, one thing that I'm thinking about is actually not necessarily horror related, but I've coming in the one shot coming up, I've got 6 players. And so a question that I'm going to be talking to them about is how much spotlight are you expecting? Or how much spotlight do you want? Because I know some people are more comfortable than others. And I don't want someone to be disappointed if their character doesn't have as many significant interactions, let's say.
If they play with me and I talk too much,
It's the
then
Rachel
they're-
show.
But I just,
Oh, it only
I
got
want
one
to
finger
know
this
everyone's
time.
comfort level
Fine.
with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a really good consideration. That was a consideration that we had in some light conversations that we also had before we started Amber Heart. Like, hey guys, we're doing a one shot with 5 people, and we don't all want to be here until like 3 a.m. So we're going to be shuffling, and is everyone comfortable with some? And now that we've extended into sessions and campaign, it's like sometimes it's going to be more on one person than another. It's because like I don't want to be like, yes, your 15 minutes of talking are up. Now we pivot. Yeah, I
15
think
minutes
that's a
of
really good
talking
point.
is like 5 words for Nero.
Right. And they 4 of them are Steve.
Hey, Steve, how's the family?
How
And scene.
are you?
And that's a wrap on Nero there. We're moving on.
Rachel, conversations.
Conversations. Yes, the question that we're answering. My ADHD brain right now is like campaign, chat, things. It's fine. You're used to me. Tyler's not used to me, but I'm sorry, Tyler.
Oh, it's fine. Will you collect yourself? There are other things that like you can kind of signal to players what kind of game it's going to be, even just by like, you know, like how much time do they have to put into a character sheet? You know, if someone like had to like buy a book to make their character, then they're probably going to be more precious about them. But if it's like a simple game where it's like you got 3 stats and bring 3 characters because 2 of them will probably die, you know, like you can, you know, be that upfront with your players in kind of giving them expectations for the kind of session they're walking into too, you know.
Yeah.
It's true.
Is this a case where we should move the spotlight along?
No, you can always have the spotlight on me. It's fine. I can bullshit enough that I could just talk endlessly. I'm a fucking teacher. I can talk endlessly about nothing for very long periods of time. When
Education in
I'm on the job,
America,
I can
everybody.
do it without cursing. Fuck you. Great teacher of 9-year-olds. This is just where I get it out with the non-9-year-old things. It's fine. I did have a thought too, just because I don't really know if anybody who ever was watching or listening to this gives a fuck about children. But I did have a thought before that I forgot to mention because distractions. That, you know, when doing scary things with kids, like kids don't often know what scares them, right? Like that is a thing that you have to be super on about, where you just are paying attention, like to their reactions, because sometimes kids want to seem brave, or sometimes, all right, everybody in the chat doesn't give a fuck about children. I get it. Okay, calm down. I know I'm weird. I like kids. But
And
so I had an Oni in the campaign with my kids, and there's like a really creepy poem in like the monster manual next to the Oni book about like the Onis. It's like rhymes, and it's about the Oni sneaking in and stealing children and shit like that. And I mentioned that it existed, and basically then gave the kids the option to be like, I would like to hear this, or I would not. And then the ones that didn't were like, I'm just going to step outside and chat with my friend out here. And, you know, and that was fine too. So then it wasn't just, you know, not being able to include this thing that was fun for them, but the other one could also say, like, I'm fine going out. But I also know that, like, not everybody has those kinds of relationships with children. Well, they'll be super open with them. But to be fair, it's kind of hard to play with children if you don't have a close relationship with them, because kids are difficult.
But I think one of the other things that also analogizes very well to generally a lot of the things we've been talking about is that also implies a level of the trust at the table that the other players weren't then going to be chanting the creepy ass poem at the other players. And I'm not saying that that wasn't justified or that everything has to be restrained, but that's what we're trying to build, right? I have full confidence in you all that know if this has gone down, like, right, this goes to the exact analogy of if someone hits the X card, the first response, I really trust and believe in my players, is going to be, how can we help? What's going on? What do we need to do? That's the only response. And it's like, oh, okay, this person, we needed to not hear that poem. Let's not chant that poem at them. But before, one really good one actually that I want to highlight that was really good, and Tyler also kind of just alluded to this, but Andy even reminded me of, and reminded us all of before we did Night Hag. Are you okay with your character dying? Which is a good conversation to have generally, but especially in a horror game, because especially in a horror one-shot, the body counts tend to be pretty high on those. And so that's a really good question to ask. And I think that the biggest general question that I try to either have a feel for when I'm having people pulled in, or I try to get to know when I'm having new players at my table, is what are you looking for, right? I try to establish sort of what my ethos is around tabletop RPGs, and I try to really clearly signal like the things like, I want to run a table where if someone's not okay, our first priority is that. And doing whatever needs to happen. If we're just done and no one's talking about it, okay. If it's, let's all talk about this a little bit, let's just cool down, let's go play something else, let's veil, let's fast forward, any of these kinds of models, that's what I want at my table. And then second, what are you looking for in content? Maybe these were ideas that I'm having, but I can totally add more things. Like, one of the things that I'm often really clear with my players about when we're doing campaigns, one-shots, etc., like especially in D&D, is I'm not going to run a ton of combat. I love D&D. D&D is a very fun system. D&D is also that thing where the internet joke of D&D, the game where it takes 5 seconds to traverse 3 days of travel, and then takes 7.5 hours to go through 12 seconds of combat. And I'm like, I'd rather that y'all got to bring these characters to life and interact with them. And I get that that's not everyone's cup of tea. I get that a lot of people want to go dungeon crawl, beat up the bad guys, and walk away with a sack of loot. I want people who want to play with characters and solve puzzles, and I don't think that either of us are wrong. But let's make sure that that's what you want, because otherwise you're going to be bored as hell in one of my games. Like, if you want to roll for initiative every session, I am not a good DM.
Yeah, and some of that kind of, with like the D&D-ification of the hobby, like sometimes it is just looking for different games, because when you think about the verbs that D&D gives you, when you think about the rules that it gives you, a lot of those rules are around combat. So if someone were to read the book and be like, all right, well, like 70% of this is on fighting, then yeah, they're going to go into it expecting fighting. But even something as small as like, from a designer end, giving players the verb overcome obstacle instead of fight, like if you are rolling to overcome obstacle rather than rolling to hit, some people may like, choose to interpret that as like, I'm going to overcome this obstacle through force. But if all you're really rolling for is overcoming the obstacle, then that is a rule set that can be applied to puzzles, that can be applied to all kinds of different things. And sometimes, sometimes you just have to play a handful of games to figure out what you like that they do and what you don't like that they do, and then find whatever works best for you and your group and the content you're looking for.
Yeah. Like that's a thing that I think I've had as a conversation with everyone, because I've seen plenty of games where it's like, oh, we've rolled for initiative, there is no more talking. Now there is only bloodshed. I'm like, look, guys, yeah, at times it may not work, but talking to someone is always going to be a viable strategy in my game. Sometimes Rachel does it and it produces strange fishman noises from me. The chat loves. Because you weren't really going to talk to those particular people, but you all have gone through, as the Marauders, as little combat as you've had less than you could have. Like, you have solved a lot of things with interaction and role playing, and from all of you, a desire to bring this character to life and integrate them into a situation. And that's a thing that I certainly enjoy, and I hope we all enjoy, and we've talked about this, so I think we all enjoy. My insecurities are showing. But I also 100% get that there are going to be other people where it's like, ah, cool, there's a thing, let's kill it. Okay. Let's just have that conversation. So, all right, we are a little bit over time, so I think we are going to wrap up for tonight. First and foremost, I want to thank everyone in chat for joining, and I want to thank everyone here on the screen with me for taking time, having this conversation. I've immensely enjoyed it. Loved getting to hear whatever I had to think, getting to bounce ideas around with everyone. Again, if you enjoy tabletop role-playing content and you enjoy the tenor that we've been discussing, this tenor of community we've been discussing, you can check us out here on Twitch, twitch.tv/helpfulgoat. You can also check out our archives over on YouTube, where we have a lot of past Goat's Eye Views, where Rachel tells you how to get children to flirt with trolls. And nope, we're moving on. That's it. That's the wrap for it this session. Where we talk about communication at the table, ways of fostering sort of togetherness, tips and tricks, lots of different types of stuff. So you can check those out on YouTube. You can also check out the archives of us playing games. You can check out our podcasts. They're down below in the Twitch description, and you can find those basically wherever you get your podcasts. Goats and Dragons is our long form feed, the level 1 to level 20 campaign, and it also includes a brief sort of side campaign that we played with Dominic Monaghan. And then in the Helpful Goat Presents, there's lots of different stuff. There's our Halloween things. There's my tier campaigns that we've spent some time talking about. So you can check out both of those podcast feeds. And if the idea of a community where people are super supportive and super caring and take care of each other sounds appealing, ! Discord in the chat has popped up a link. You can join that and hang out more with us. Again, from Helpful Goat, thank you so much to everyone for appearing, especially thank you, Tyler, for making time for us and sharing insight on materials. Had a lot of fun. Hope to have you back at some point.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Awesome. From everyone here at Helpful Goat Gaming, thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful night. Take care of yourself. Take care of everyone else. And be kind. We love you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.